Joining me right now is Shoykat Chakrabarti. He's the former chief of staff and campaign manager for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and he's announced he is running against Nancy Pelosi for her congressional seat in California. It's good to see you, Shoykat. Thanks for coming in. How do you respond to Leader Jeffries there?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kate. I think right now, if you look at the Democratic Party, it's about as underwater as it's ever been. I think last time I checked, 9%, it's underwater by 9 points amongst Democrats. And there's a real sense of frustration because Democrats lost this last election. And after that happened, people were really hoping that Democrats would have some sort of soul searching and figure out what went wrong. How do we actually win back? Not just fight back against Trump, but what do we do next time? And I haven't seen that. I don't think anyone's seen that. And that's why people are challenging the current leadership. Usually when you lose elections like this, in every other country, we replace the leaders, right? And they talk about having new leaders come up and taking the party in a new direction.
Do you like what David Hogg is planning to do, $20 million to primary older Democrats?
I don't think it's just about primarying older Democrats. I think we need a whole movement that really replaces a big part of the Democratic Party, because when you look at what the Democratic Party stands for right now, we're losing our base amongst working class people and middle class people. And that's happening because of a larger underlying set of circumstances. For most people in this country, wages have been stagnating for decades while the cost of living has just been skyrocketing. And that's why people are voting for bold, sweeping change every chance they get. They did it with Obama. They did it again with Trump, right? So what I'd like to see is actually a whole new generation of leaders in the Democratic Party running on a real economic vision to counter what the far right is proposing. And that's the way to defeat them, not just for one election, but for decades. That's how FDR defeated the far right in the 1930s, when that movement was filling Madison Square Garden with rallies. He proposed a whole new economic vision and transformation that improved people's lives so dramatically that the far right and the authoritarian right was gone for decades and decades in this country.
How do you apply lessons learned from your time working with Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and her campaign that for people who weren't watching, they thought it came out of nowhere that she won. What are the lessons you learned from that you apply now to your race? You announced very early that you are trying to challenge Nancy Pelosi. Some would argue your hill to climb is even higher than what AOC faced.
Yeah, what I remember seeing in that time was it was similar to this political moment. There was this appetite for change because Trump had just won in 2016. Democrats really frustrated their party for losing that election, and they're looking for some sort of new vision, right? And it's really hard for new ideas to come up in the party from the same old leaders. So it really had to be this outside race. AOC came in from the outside, primary Joe Crowley, who was the next in line to be speaker, very powerful Democrat. And it took that for new ideas to get pushed, ideas like we should invest in our economy, we should invest in industry and, build out high wage industries. Those ideas came because it came from the outside. But what I see right now is the moment of change we're in right now, it completely dwarfs what we saw in 2018. The level of frustration, the level of appetite for something new is way higher. So I really think the time is right now for reforming the Democratic Party and also just reforming, turning this back into a party that actually fights for the working class and the middle class and does so in a believable way and fights against corruption, because that's going to be a very important thing in this election.
And Democratic members of Congress will say that's exactly what they're doing, fighting against corruption. You see what Cory Booker says that's one of the reasons why he was standing up and did his now record-breaking speech on the floor. I know that I have been told by many a sitting Democrat saying that they are fighting for the working class and they need to continue to push that message more. Add to that, though, many people, including some Democrats, took as one message from this election is that the party has run too far left. The New York Times editorial board last month wrote, Democrats should recognize that the party has moved too far left on social issues after Barack Obama left office in 2017. Even today, the party remains too focused on personal identity and on Americans' differences by race, gender, sexuality, and religion rather than our shared values. Do you see that point?
Well, first, I do want to push back a little bit on that the Democrats have been fighting against corruption because when the Democrats had power, we didn't manage to ban members of Congress from trading and owning stock, an issue that's incredibly popular. 87% of Republicans want members of Congress to ban owning and trading stock. And they could right now do something that I call the discharge petition to try to force a floor vote on something like this, right? If it's really such a bipartisan issue. But to talk about, the other piece of it, I really think it's a bit of a red herring that Democrats are focusing on just these social issues. I agree that Democrats need to actually focus on an economic vision, right? Like they need to focus on how to drastically improve millions of people's lives. That's what people thought they're voting for when they voted for Donald Trump, even though Donald Trump, stood for a lot of very unpopular social issues. Most people in the country believe Donald Trump would pass a national abortion ban. And that's a very salient social issue, and people voted for him anyway, right? So why did that happen? It's because he stood for economic change. He stood for bold, sweeping change, though he's not doing it, of course. He's destroying the economy. So I think Democrats have to figure out how they can stand for that kind of larger, bold, sweeping change that's going to transform the entire economy, not just little reforms.
Let us see where this goes and where your campaign heads. Shoykot, thank you for coming in. Appreciate your time.